Welcome back now to Matters of the State. We're joined now by Dr. Bonnie Omdahl. She's a spokesperson for Protecting South Dakota Kids, an organization that is opposed to initiated Measure 29. Dr. Omdahl, a pleasure to see you. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
Opposed to the idea of recreational marijuana. Give me a nickel description here. Why?
Because this drug, which is not the drug of the marijuana of the 70s, has high risks and costs not only to the individuals who use, but to society as a whole. And as far as we can determine, there's actually no benefit whatsoever. So if you're trying to decide whether to vote for or against, what benefit is it to South Dakota? People will argue that it will provide tax dollars, but I will tell you that in Colorado, they've discovered that they spend about $4.50 to every tax dollar brought in due to the costs of this drug. So if it's all right with you, I'd like to go through some of the risks to the individual and also to society, because I think there's probably two groups out there. People who think, well, this is a wonderful recreational drug and I might be interested in trying it, and people who think, well, I'm not going to use it, but why should I stop someone else? Mm-hmm. And that's the societal piece. Protecting South Dakota Kids specifically is opposed to it because the cost to the individual is frequently much higher for children. And the opponents will say, well, we're not legalizing for children, we're legalizing for adults. But all the studies have shown that in the states where they legalize, the use by children goes up. For instance, in Colorado, it went up 26% for those 12 and over after legalization. And that was almost a 60% increase over the surrounding states after it was legalized. So let's talk about what it does do to an individual. There are multiple health risks. We start with risk of psychosis. High risk of acute psychosis, 2 to 5 times increased risk of acute psychosis. It is now the #1 cause for psychotic admissions due to drugs in California, bypassing methamphetamine several years ago. Okay? And with that, it is also associated with violence. The National Library of Medicine in 2020 issued a statement saying, marijuana use causes violent behavior through increased aggressiveness, paranoia, and personality changes. This drug has a 30% addiction rate or substance abuse disorder rate, which is much higher than alcohol.
Now, let me stop you there for a second. And you touched on this a little bit, but I want to dive into this for a second. Devil's advocates will say, look, tobacco's legal, and people use it, and they develop COPD, in some cases lung cancer. You touched on alcohol briefly. Alcohol is legal. It can lead to the ruin of several lives through the result of addiction. There's also drunk driving to deal with as well. Walk me through the difference then that those substances are legal, and no one is saying anything about those in relation to this.
Well,
we could talk about recreational marijuana. Essentially, the same things are said and can be true of other substances.
We could talk about that on another day, but to me that's kind of interesting because we have something that you've just outlined is terrible for society.
Can be terrible depending on
how
it's used.
And so here's one difference between alcohol and marijuana, and that is you can have a drink or two and not be impaired. Not so with marijuana. The whole goal is to be impaired, right? Alcohol is water soluble. Marijuana is fat soluble. It's going to stay in your body much longer, and it's going to preferentially go to your brain. So blood tests don't even accurately reflect the degree of impairment. They will show that you've been exposed to marijuana, but not necessarily the degree of impairment the way that alcohol tests will.
I think the argument is that it depends on its level of use. And I think that what you're outlining, I think, can be completely accurate. Mm-hmm. No argument. But it's also depending on how it is used.
Well, yes and no. The psychotic risk is unpredictable. You may get an acute psychosis episode the first time you use it. You may be using 5 years, and then you get an acute psychotic
episode. Depending on the person, right?
And it's not genetically related at all.
But it's based on their individual chemical makeup, right?
Maybe. Yeah. We don't know yet.
Okay.
I will tell you that I saw several of those when I was still practicing medicine, and there was no predicting. Do you mind if I move on to societal risks?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just because we are short on time today, I know. So a lot of people say, I'm not going to use it. My kids aren't going to use it. What do I care, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you why. First of all, simply legalizing it creates a perception of safety and a tacit approval. So as I alluded to before, it increases the risk of use in children. So if you vote to legalize it, you're increasing the risk that your own children or grandchildren will eventually use it, okay? There's been a significant increase in traffic accidents and deaths in states that have legalized and that have found that that increase due to people who are testing positive for marijuana. 27% of regular users admit to driving high on a daily basis. So you vote to legalize this drug, that's what you're going to have out on the roads. Okay, 60% of regular users say they occasionally drive high. Okay, traffic deaths with positive testing drivers increased 138% in Colorado after legalization, and more than doubled in Washington state. And those numbers came from a AAA study. For workers testing positive in the general workforce, 8% increase in people who tested positive in safety-sensitive jobs. Now, I don't know about you, but I really don't want my surgeon or my cop using. And you want to talk about increase in crime. The opposition argues that legalizing means that you have less black market participation. Absolutely the opposite has been found, at least in Colorado. In 2021, legal sales accounted for $25 billion, but the black market was estimated to be $75 to $80 billion.
What would you say to people that you encounter that would say to you, if I want to use this, I should have the right to use it, even if you tell me factoids from another state about what could possibly happen?
Well, my response to that is, and I do believe in personal freedom, but it seems to me that your personal freedom stops where you begin to really infringe on other people's rights. And many of these issues, in the end, especially with 30% addiction rate, these individuals do not end up taking the personal responsibility that they could or should. Now, yeah, okay, there's some people who will, but there's a significant number of people who won't. And as we've talked about, for children's protection and sake, particularly in child abuse and neglect cases, I think that we owe it to protect them. And if you make that argument, well then, why not legalize all drugs? I think if you take a good long look at the northwest part of this country, you'll see why we don't want to legalize all drugs. And they're trying to pull back on that because they've seen the consequences.
Dr. Bonnie Omdahl, a spokesperson for Protecting South Dakota Kids, join us on matters of the state. Thank you for sharing your time and your thoughts with us.
Oh, thank you for listening so attentively.
You bet.
If you missed any of this special report, you can find it online. Be sure to join us next week as we turn our attention to Initiated Measure 28, which aims to repeal the state grocery tax. We'll sit down with Dakotans for Health co-founder Rick Weiland and Sioux Falls Mayor Paul Tenhaken. That will do it for us on this Sunday. We hope to see you right back here again next week. From all of us to all of you, have a great day.